Long before blueprints, machines, or written history, people were already shaping the world in stone. Not randomly, not crudely, but with precision, planning, and patience that still challenges modern understanding. Across deserts, coasts, forests, and highlands, these structures were built to manage water, protect communities, track the sky, honor the dead, and organize daily life. Many of them were constructed in environments where survival itself was uncertain, yet they endure. This documentary explores those places one by one, focusing not on legend, but on what remains in the architecture itself. The walls, foundations, platforms, and carvings that still reveal how early societies thought, planned, and built. There are no shortcuts here, only stone, landscape, and time. Stay with it. Chand Baori Stepwell. Chand Baori lies in the village of Abhaneri in Rajasthan, where the landscape is shaped by heat, dust, and long seasonal extremes. Rain is scarce, temperatures are severe, and survival has always depended on managing water carefully, rather than expecting it to arrive predictably. Architecture here responds not to abundance, but to absence. Historically, the structure is known as Chand Baori, one of the deepest and most geometrically complex stepwells ever built in the Indian subcontinent. Construction is generally dated between the 8th and 9th centuries CE, during a period when stepwells functioned as essential infrastructure rather than decorative monuments. From the surface, Chand Baori appears as a vast square void cut into the ground. There is no gradual reveal. The space opens suddenly, dropping steeply downward through layer after layer of stone steps. The effect is immediate and disorienting, not because of height, but because of repetition. Thousands of narrow steps descend in precise symmetry, forming a dense lattice of lines that guide the eye downward toward the water far below. The geometry is relentless. Each level mirrors the one above it, creating visual order in a landscape defined by unpredictability. This repetition is not ornamental, it is functional. The step design allows access to water regardless of seasonal fluctuation. As water levels rise and fall, the steps remain usable, ensuring that people can always reach the surface of the well. Unlike wells that isolate water at a single point, Chand Baori distributes access across depth. Architecture here adapts continuously rather than fixing one solution. The depth of the well creates its own microclimate. As one descends, the temperature drops noticeably. Stone absorbs heat and releases it slowly, turning the well into a refuge from the extreme heat above. This environmental effect was intentional, even if not formally measured. The builders understood how stone, depth, and shade interacted. The stepwell was not only a source of water, it was a place of gathering, rest, and ritual. People descended to collect water, but also to pause, meet, and remain. On one side of the well, a pavilion and temple structures rise above the steps, breaking the symmetry with controlled irregularity. These spaces provided shade and ceremonial function, linking water to belief. Water in this context was not merely practical, it was sacred. The alignment of the steps emphasizes descent rather than ascent. Movement inward and downward dominates experience. Architecture guides the body gently but insistently toward depth. There's no central stair. Multiple paths exist simultaneously, allowing many people to move without crossing directly. This design supports collective use without congestion. The scale of Chand Baori required immense labor. Stone had to be quarried, shaped, and placed with precision across multiple levels. Any misalignment would have disrupted the entire pattern. Yet the structure does not display effort openly. There are no inscriptions celebrating patrons, no reliefs depicting builders. The work speaks through completion rather than proclamation. The stepwell's geometry creates visual complexity from simple repetition. No individual step is remarkable. The effect emerges only when viewed as a whole. This approach reflects a broader architectural philosophy. Meaning arises from accumulation rather than singular emphasis. The well's square form reinforces stability. Corners anchor the structure visually, preventing the descent from feeling infinite or uncontrolled. As water levels changed over centuries, the well adapted without alteration. Its design anticipated variation rather than resisting it. This adaptability distinguishes Chand Baori from monumental architecture built to assert permanence through immobility. Here, permanence is achieved through flexibility. The stepwell remained in use for generations. integrated into daily life rather than reserved for special occasions. Its durability came from relevance. Over time, as water systems modernized, the well's practical role declined. It was no longer essential for survival, yet the structure remained, too large and too precise to dismantle easily. Its preservation owes much to its depth. What is underground is often left undisturbed. Today, Chanbari is often described through spectacle, its symmetry photographed and admired. But this focus risks missing its original function. The well was not built to impress, it was built to work. Its beauty emerges from problem solving rather than decoration. Stone here is used not to separate people from environment, but to mediate between them. The descent into Chanbaori reverses typical architectural movement. Instead of rising toward power or divinity, one moves downward toward necessity. This inversion is central to its meaning. Water lies below. Life depends on descent. The structure acknowledges vulnerability rather than denying it. Chanbaori demonstrates how infrastructure can become monumental without abandoning purpose. It shows how repetition can create order in unstable conditions. It records a society that invested deeply in shared survival rather than individual display. As the 14th chapter of this journey, Chanbaori expands the understanding of stone architecture beyond tombs, temples, and fortifications. It reveals architecture as response rather than assertion. Stone here does not commemorate death or authority. It supports life. The steps remain, descending patiently into shadow, long after the hands that placed them have vanished. And in their repetition, they continue to hold memory, function, and meaning together, quietly embedded in the earth. Pentre Ifan. Pentre Ifan stands on a gentle slope in Pembrokeshire, Western Wales, overlooking open farmland with distant views toward the Prehistoric Hills. The landscape is broad and quiet, shaped by wind, rain, and long horizons rather than dramatic elevation. Nothing in the terrain demands a monument here, yet one was placed deliberately and has remained for thousands of years. Archaeologically, the site is identified as Pentre Ifan, a Neolithic burial monument constructed around 3500 BCE. It belongs to a wider tradition of megalithic tomb building across Atlantic Europe, yet its form is unusually spare, precise, and exposed. The monument consists of a massive capstone balanced on a small number of slender, upright stones. The capstone weighs several tons, yet it appears to float above the ground, its edges extending well beyond the supports beneath it. This visual lightness contrasts sharply with the actual mass of the stone. Originally, Pentre Ifan was not exposed as it appears today. It was once covered by an earthen mound that enclosed the chamber completely. Over time, erosion and human activity removed this covering, leaving the stone skeleton visible. What remains is the structural core of the tomb, stripped of concealment. The uprights are arranged carefully to support the capstone while leaving open space beneath. This open chamber would have housed human remains, likely placed deliberately rather than accumulated over long periods. Unlike long passage tombs, Pentre Ifan does not guide movement inward through a corridor. Access is direct and immediate. The chamber is visible from the outside, reinforcing openness rather than enclosure. This design choice shapes experience. The tomb does not hide the dead. It presents their resting place as part of the landscape. The stones themselves were sourced locally, likely from nearby outcrops. Transporting and raising the capstone required coordination, timing, and shared effort. The placement of the capstone demanded precision. Its weight had to be distributed evenly across the uprights to prevent collapse. Once positioned, adjustment would have been impossible. This finality suggests confidence in method rather than trial and error. The monument's proportions are striking. The height of the capstone relative to the uprights creates tension between stability and exposure. The structure looks fragile, yet it has endured for millennia. This balance reflects a sophisticated understanding of stone behavior. There are no carvings, engravings, or surface decoration. Meaning is carried entirely by form, placement, and relationship to space. The tomb's orientation aligns roughly east-west, a pattern common among Neolithic burial sites. While exact celestial alignment remains debated, the orientation reinforces connection to daily solar movement. The absence of a long passage or deep chamber suggests that burial here was symbolic, rather than practical. The monument may have served as a marker of ancestry rather than a repository for remains. The original mound would have softened the monument's outline, integrating it into the surrounding land. Its removal exposes the architectural logic that was never meant to be seen directly. This exposure transforms interpretation. What was once interior becomes exterior. What was once hidden becomes iconic. Folklore later attached meaning to the structure, attributing it to giants or supernatural builders. These stories reflect awe rather than explanation. The real significance lies in restraint. Pentraifan achieves monumentality without mass accumulation or complexity. A small number of stones create a structure that commands attention through proportion alone. This economy of means distinguishes it from larger cairns and passage tombs. The site does not dominate its surroundings. It punctuates them. Movement around the monument is unrestricted. There are no walls, no prescribed paths, no controlled entry points. Interaction is informal and immediate. This openness suggests that the tomb functioned as a visible reference point rather than a closed ritual space. The monument's longevity owes much to its simplicity. Fewer stones mean fewer points of failure. Balance replaces redundancy. Pentraifan has survived because it was built with restraint rather than ambition. The structure also reflects a worldview in which death was integrated into the living landscape rather than separated from it. The dead were not hidden far from view. They remained present within daily space. Stone here marks continuity rather than finality. The tomb does not narrate belief through imagery. It does not instruct through text. It relies on presence. Standing beneath the capstone, one becomes aware of scale, weight, and time. The stone above has remained in place across countless seasons, weather events, and generations. The monument does not demand interpretation, it invites reflection. Pentraifan demonstrates how Neolithic societies could achieve enduring impact through minimal intervention. It shows how architecture can be both exposed and stable, simple and profound. The stones do not compete with the landscape. They frame it. They remain fixed while everything around them changes. As the 15th chapter of this journey, Pentraifan reinforces the idea that early stone architecture did not always seek enclosure, mystery, or spectacle. Sometimes, meaning was created by lifting a single stone and leaving space beneath it. The tomb stands open to sky and wind, unchanged in form even as understanding shifts. It does not explain itself. It endures. And in that endurance, it continues to mark the relationship between people, stone, and memory, quietly anchored in the Welsh landscape. Monte da Codi. Monte da Codi rises from the plains near Sassari in northern Sardinia, standing apart from the surrounding farmland as a structure that does not resemble any other prehistoric monument in Europe. The land here is open and expansive, shaped by agriculture and wind, offering little vertical emphasis. Against this flat horizon, the monument's step form feels deliberate and unusual. Archaeologically, the site is identified as Monte da Codi, a ritual complex first constructed around 4000 BCE, during the Neolithic period, and later rebuilt and expanded in the Copper Age. Its form has often been compared to Mesopotamian step platforms, though it predates most known ziggurats and exists far outside their cultural sphere. The structure consists of a massive stone platform, accessed by a long straight ramp that rises gradually from ground level to the top. The ascent is not steep. It is measured and controlled, shaping movement rather than forcing it. Unlike burial monuments or enclosed chambers, Monte da Codi offers no interior space. It's entirely external. Architecture here is about elevation, approach, and exposure rather than containment. The original Neolithic structure was smaller, built from layered stone and earth, forming a raised altar-like platform. Centuries later, this platform was intentionally buried beneath a larger structure, which followed the same basic form but increased scale and prominence. This rebuilding did not erase the earlier monument, it preserved it inside the newer one. Stone slabs were laid carefully, creating a stable surface capable of supporting activity above. The ramp aligns directly with the platform, guiding attention upward without distraction. At the summit, the platform offers an unobstructed view of the surrounding landscape and sky. There are no walls, columns, or enclosures. The space is open to light, wind, and weather. Excavations around the monument revealed standing, stones, altars, and animal remains, indicating ritual activity rather than habitation. The site wasn't lived in, it was visited. The absence of domestic structures reinforces this interpretation. Monte da Codi was not a settlement or defensive site. Its purpose was ceremonial. The monument's form suggests elevation as a symbolic act. Rising above ground level separated ritual action from ordinary space without enclosing it. This separation was achieved through movement rather than walls. The long ramp creates anticipation. One does not arrive suddenly at the top. The ascent is gradual, reinforcing transition through time and effort. The choice to build upward rather than inward distinguishes Monte da Codi from most contemporary European monuments, which emphasize burial chambers, passages, or hidden interiors. Here, meaning is created in full view. The platform's surface shows evidence of burning and offerings, suggesting repeated use over long periods. Ritual here was not singular or exceptional. It was cyclical. The surrounding stones and markers indicate that the monument functioned within a broader ceremonial landscape rather than in isolation. The decision to rebuild and enlarge the structure centuries after its initial construction indicates continuity of significance rather than abandonment. Later communities recognized the site's importance and chose to reinforce it rather than replace it. This continuity suggests shared memory rather than inherited architecture alone. The monument's orientation does not clearly align with a single celestial event, but its elevated form and open summit emphasize relationship with sky and horizon. Unlike ziggurats, which often supported temples or enclosed shrines at their summit, Monte da Codi remains empty above. The platform itself is the focus. This absence is meaningful. Ritual activity occurred in open space, exposed to elements. Stone here does not shelter. It elevates. The monument's construction required coordinated labor, planning, and sustained effort. Large stones were quarried, transported, and positioned carefully, particularly along the ramp and platform edges. Yet the structure avoids unnecessary complexity. There are no decorative carvings or symbolic reliefs. Form carries meaning. Monte da Codi resists easy classification. It is not a tomb, not a temple, not a settlement. It exists between categories. This ambiguity has led to wide-ranging interpretations, but archaeological evidence consistently points toward ritual use rather than practical function. The monument does not explain itself. It establishes conditions. Standing at the base, one sees the ramp rising steadily. Standing at the top, one sees land and sky extending outward. Architecture here mediates between ground and horizon. The site was eventually abandoned. The reasons are unclear, but changes in ritual practice or social organization likely played a role. When use ended, the monument was left intact. It was not dismantled or repurposed. Over time, soil and vegetation partially covered it, softening its outline without erasing its form. Its rediscovery revealed a structure unlike any other in Europe, challenging assumptions about prehistoric architectural boundaries. Monte da Codi demonstrates that ideas about elevation, ritual platforms, and monumentality did not belong exclusively to the Near East. They emerged independently in different cultural contexts. Stone here records convergence rather than influence. The monument shows how early societies experimented with form long before architectural traditions became standardized. It preserves a moment of architectural confidence without precedent or successor. Monte da Codi does not fit into a linear narrative of development. It stands alone. As the 16th chapter of this journey, Monte da Codi expands the understanding of prehistoric stone architecture beyond burial and enclosure. It reveals a society willing to build upward into open space, shaping movement and attention without walls or chambers. The monument remains grounded, exposed, and unresolved. It does not offer answers. It offers position. And in doing so, it continues to hold a place where stone, sky, and human intention meet, quietly elevated above the land that surrounds it. Tucumí Pyramid Clusters. Tucumí lies in the Lambayeque Valley of northern Peru, where the desert meets irrigated farmland and the land stretches wide beneath an open sky. From a distance, the site appears as a low-rise in an otherwise flat landscape. Only when approached does its scale become clear. Archaeologically, the site is identified as Tucumí, one of the largest monumental complexes in South America. Rather than a single pyramid, Tucumí consists of more than 26 large adobe structures spread across a broad area, arranged around a central hill known as Cerro La Raya. This is not a city built upward. It is a landscape shaped horizontally, where space is organized through repetition, alignment, and accumulation rather than height alone. The pyramids at Tukume are often referred to as huacas, a term that reflects sacred significance rather than architectural category. These structures were not built as tombs or temples in the narrow sense. They were platforms for ritual, administration, storage, and ceremony. Construction at Tukume spans multiple cultural phases, including the Lambayeke, Chimu, and later Inca periods. Each group added, modified, and repurposed structures without erasing what came before. This continuity is visible in the architecture itself. New platforms were built over older ones. Walls were extended, terraces reshaped, and access routes redirected. The result is not architectural uniformity, but layered intention. The pyramids are constructed primarily from adobe bricks, made from mud and straw shaped by hand and dried in the sun. This material choice reflects environmental adaptation rather than limitation. Adobe allowed rapid construction, easy repair, and expansion over time. When a structure needed to grow, new layers could be added without dismantling the old. Many of the pyramids have broad ramps leading upward rather than stairways. These ramps controlled movement, allowing processions, transport of goods, and ritual ascent without abrupt transition. Movement at Tukume is gradual rather than dramatic. The largest structure, Huaca Larga, extends for hundreds of meters, making it one of the longest adobe pyramids ever built. Its length emphasizes precision and direction rather than vertical dominance. From the top of these platforms, visibility across the valley is extensive. The pyramids were positioned to oversee irrigation channels, fields, and movement routes, linking architecture directly to resource management. This connection between monument and landscape is central to understanding Tukume. The pyramids were not isolated sacred spaces. They were embedded within systems of agriculture, water control, and labor organization. Administrative areas, storage rooms, and courtyards are integrated into the structures, suggesting that ritual and governance operated together rather than separately. There is little emphasis on decoration at large scale. Walls were often plain, occasionally painted, but rarely carved in stone. Meaning was carried through scale, placement, and use. The adobe surfaces erode easily when exposed. This vulnerability required continuous maintenance, indicating that these structures were active, not symbolic ruins. A pyramid at Tukume was never truly finished. It was always becoming. Ceremonial activity likely involved large groups gathering in open courtyards at the base or atop platforms. The architecture supports visibility and movement rather than enclosure. This openness suggests communal ritual rather than restricted elite access, though control was still exercised through layout and elevation. Cerro La Raya, the natural hill at the center of the complex, anchors the site both visually and symbolically. The pyramids radiate around it, reinforcing its importance without altering it. The hill was not reshaped or built over. It was left intact, incorporated into the ceremonial landscape rather than transformed. This integration of natural and built forms reflects Andean cosmology, where mountains and landforms held inherent significance. The builders of Tukume did not impose architecture onto the landscape. They arranged it around existing features. Over time, the site accumulated power and meaning. Later cultures recognized its importance and chose to occupy it rather than establish new centers elsewhere. The Inca, upon arriving, adapted parts of Tukume for their own administrative use, adding structures while preserving the core layout. This reuse did not erase earlier identities. It layered them. The abandonment of Tukume was gradual rather than sudden. Environmental change, political shifts, and colonial disruption contributed to its decline. Adobe structures collapsed slowly, returning to Earth without dramatic destruction. What remains today is a landscape of forms rather than intact buildings. Low walls, terraces, and platform outlines trace decisions made over centuries. Tukume challenges assumptions that monumentality requires stone or permanence through rigidity. Here, permanence was achieved through maintenance, repetition, and scale. The pyramids were not meant to resist time unchanged. They were meant to be renewed. This philosophy contrasts sharply with stone traditions that seek durability through mass alone. At Tukume, endurance came from relevance. The pyramid clusters reveal a society capable of organizing labor across generations, coordinating construction, and integrating ritual with daily life. They show how architecture can operate as infrastructure rather than symbol. The absence of dramatic vertical forms does not diminish the site's impact. It expands it. Monumentality here is spread across space rather than concentrated. The site reads as a system rather than a statement. Walking through Tukume, one does not encounter a single focal point. Attention shifts continuously from one platform to another, reinforcing collective importance rather than individual dominance. This distributed focus reflects social organization rather than aesthetic choice. The pyramids do not explain themselves through imagery or inscription. They require observation of layout, movement, and relationship to land. They record how people organize power without isolating it. As the fourth chapter of this journey, Tukum expands the understanding of prehistoric and early historic architecture beyond stone and enclosure. It demonstrates how Earth itself could be monumental. It shows how repetition across space can create authority without spectacle. The pyramid clusters remain, softened by time but still legible, tracing pathways of movement, labor, and belief across the valley. They don't stand apart from the land. They are part of it, and through their spread, their layers, and their quiet persistence, Tukume continues to reveal how early societies built not just structures, but systems, carefully arranged, continuously adapted, and deeply rooted in place. Zambujal Fortified Complex. The Zambujal Fortified Complex stands on a low hill in western Portugal, overlooking land that once connected inland communities to the Atlantic coast. The terrain is gently rising rather than dramatic, shaped by rolling ground and open visibility rather than natural barriers. In this setting, defense was not provided by cliffs or rivers. It had to be built. Archaeologically, the site is identified as Zambujal, a fortified settlement occupied primarily during the Copper Age, between roughly 3000 and 2000 BCE. It belongs to a broader tradition of early fortification emerging in the Iberian Peninsula during a period of growing population, trade, and competition. Zambujal was not built all at once. Its fortifications developed gradually, layer by layer, as needs changed. What survives today is the result of repeated construction, reinforcement, and redesign rather than a single architectural vision. The settlement is defined by thick stone walls that encircle the hilltop, forming a compact but heavily defended enclosure. These walls are not simple barriers. They are complex systems, incorporating bastions, narrow corridors, and controlled entry points. Stone was chosen for permanence, but the design shows adaptability rather than rigidity. The walls were built from locally available limestone, stacked carefully without mortar. Their thickness varies, often reaching several meters, allowing them to absorb force rather than resist it through height alone. Some sections include rounded towers or projecting bastions that break the straight line of the wall. These features create overlapping fields of visibility and control movement around the perimeter. Entry into the settlement was tightly regulated. Gateways were narrow, indirect, and enclosed by stone corridors. Anyone entering would have been slowed, observed, and guided through constrained space. Defense at Zambujal relied as much on movement control as on mass. Inside the walls, space was limited. Domestic structures, storage areas, and workspaces were tightly arranged, suggesting sustained occupation rather than temporary refuge. The settlement was not built for a single moment of crisis. It was lived in. Evidence from excavation indicates metalworking activity, particularly copper processing. This places Zambujal within early networks of metallurgy that were reshaping social organization across Europe. Metal production required protection. Knowledge, tools, and materials needed to be secured. The fortifications reflect this need. Zambujal's position allowed monitoring of movement through the surrounding landscape. Routes connecting coastal zones to inland regions passed nearby, making the site strategically valuable. This was not isolation. It was control. The repeated strengthening of walls over time suggests that threats were persistent rather than hypothetical. Each new construction phase responded to real pressure, whether from rival groups, competition over resources, or shifting alliances. The architecture records tension without describing it. Rather than expanding outward, the settlement focused on reinforcing its core. Space inside remained dense. Security took precedence over growth. This inward focus shaped daily life. Movement was constrained. Visibility was controlled. Privacy was limited. Stone here structured behavior as much as it blocked access. Unlike later fortresses designed for armies, Zambujal's defenses were built for small-scale conflict. There's no evidence of siege engines or large formations. Defense relied on walls, narrow passages, and elevation rather than numbers. The settlement's design suggests intimate knowledge of its own vulnerabilities. Each corridor, turn, and enclosure reflects anticipation of movement. The builders were not reacting blindly. They were adapting consciously. Over time, the settlement was eventually abandoned. The reasons remain debated, but shifts in trade routes, resource availability, or social organization likely played a role. When occupation ended, the walls remained. Stone structures of this scale were not easily dismantled. They resisted reuse and erosion. As soil accumulated and vegetation spread, the fortification softened into the landscape without disappearing. Modern excavation revealed a site far more complex than a simple defensive wall. Zambojal is a record of architectural decision-making under pressure. It shows how early communities responded to instability by investing heavily in shared protection. The fortifications do not glorify power. They reveal anxiety. They don't assert dominance through scale alone. They prioritize control and survival. Zambojal demonstrates that fortification did not emerge suddenly in the age of empires. It began much earlier, rooted in local conditions and immediate concerns. Stone here marks a shift in how communities related to land and each other. The wall becomes a boundary not just of space, but of identity. Inside is shared. Outside is uncertain. The settlement does not leave inscriptions or monuments to leaders. Authority is embedded in architecture rather than declared. Defense is collective rather than symbolic. Zambojal challenges the idea that prehistoric societies were loosely organized or incapable of long-term planning. The fortifications required coordination, labor scheduling, material sourcing, and knowledge transfer across generations. This was not improvisation. It was strategy built in stone. As the fifth chapter of this journey, Zambojal shifts focus from ritual and burial to protection and control. It reveals how architecture became a response to tension rather than belief alone. The walls remain low and broken today, but their logic is still visible. They trace how people learned to define space through stone when the landscape itself offered no shelter. Zambojal does not stand as a monument to conquest. It stands as evidence of adaptation. And through its layered walls and constrained passages, it continues to show how early communities used architecture not to dominate the world, but to survive within it. Dholavira Reservoir System. Dholavira lies on Kadir Bet, an island within the salt flats of the Rann of Kutch in western India, a landscape defined by extremes. For much of the year, the ground is dry, cracked, and reflective under intense heat. During the monsoon, water arrives suddenly and unpredictably, flooding low-lying areas before disappearing just as quickly. Survival here has always depended on understanding water not as a constant presence, but as a brief and valuable event. Archaeologically, the site is identified as Dholavira, one of the largest and most sophisticated urban centers of the Indus Valley Civilization, occupied roughly between 3000 and 1500 BCE. What sets Dholavira apart is not only its scale or layout, but the extraordinary system built to capture, store, and manage water. The city was planned around water from the beginning. Unlike settlements that adapted to rivers flowing nearby, Dholavira was constructed in a region without a perennial water source. Every drop had to be collected, guided, and preserved. Massive stone-lined reservoirs were cut directly into the bedrock surrounding the city. These reservoirs vary in size and depth, arranged in a network that intercepts seasonal runoff from surrounding catchments. Rather than relying on a single storage basin, the system distributes water across multiple reservoirs. This redundancy ensured that failure in one area would not threaten the entire settlement. Stone walls lined the reservoirs with remarkable precision. Blocks were carefully shaped and fitted, creating stable retaining surfaces capable of holding large volumes of water without collapse. The reservoirs are connected by channels, sluices, and spillways that regulate flow during periods of heavy rain. Excess water could be redirected safely, preventing erosion and damage. This is not passive storage. It is active management. The system reflects detailed understanding of terrain, slope, and gravity. Water was guided naturally without mechanical lifting, using gradient alone. Steps descend into several reservoirs, allowing access as water levels changed. These steps also slowed movement, reinforcing careful use rather than rapid extraction. The reservoirs were positioned alongside the city's walls and major streets, integrating water infrastructure directly into urban design rather than isolating it at the margins. This integration suggests that water management was central to civic life, not a secondary concern. The city itself was divided into distinct zones: Citadel, Middle Town, and Lower Town, each aligned with water structures. Reservoirs served multiple areas, ensuring equitable distribution. The scale of construction is striking. Some reservoirs rival later stepwells in size, yet they were built more than 4,000 years earlier, using stone tools and coordinated labor. There is no evidence of decorative emphasis. Walls are plain, steps are functional. The focus remains on durability and access. This restraint highlights purpose over display. The builders of Dolavira did not assume water would always return. The system anticipates scarcity as a recurring condition, rather than a temporary crisis. This anticipation suggests long-term observation of climate patterns and collective memory encoded into architecture. Maintenance would have been essential. Silt had to be removed, walls repaired, channels cleared. This implies organized labor beyond initial construction. Water management here was not a one-time achievement. It was a sustained practice. The reservoirs also played a social role. Access points became gathering spaces. Movement toward water followed defined paths, reinforcing order and cooperation. Unlike monumental temples or tombs, these structures supported daily survival. Their success is measured not by visibility, but by continuity. Over centuries, environmental changes and shifting trade routes contributed to the city's decline. As water became harder to manage, occupation diminished. When Dolavira was abandoned, its reservoirs remained. Cut into bedrock and lined with stone, they resisted erosion and reuse. What survives today is a clear outline of how the city functioned, even in absence of walls and roofs. The reservoir system reveals a society that prioritized collective infrastructure over individual monumentality. Stone here does not mark power or belief. It marks foresight. The builders invested immense effort into something that would rarely be seen full. Reservoirs are most visible when empty, yet most valuable when full. This inversion reflects a practical worldview rather than symbolic ambition. Dolavira challenges the assumption that early urban societies relied solely on nearby rivers. It demonstrates that planned water engineering could sustain large populations even in marginal environments. The system does not rely on complexity for its own sake. Each element serves a clear function within a larger whole. The absence of ornament allows structure to remain legible thousands of years later. Water here shaped architecture, not the other way around. The city grew around its reservoirs, adjusting streets, walls, and zones to support them. This relationship reverses common expectations of ancient planning. At Dolavira, infrastructure is not hidden beneath the city. It is the city. As the sixth chapter of this journey, the Dolavira reservoir system expands the understanding of prehistoric stone architecture beyond ritual, burial, and defense. It reveals engineering as cultural expression. It shows how stone could be used not to commemorate the past, but to secure the future. The reservoirs remain dry much of the year, open to sky and salt wind, their steps descending into silence. Yet their presence still records a moment when human survival depended on cooperation, observation, and restraint. Stone here does not dominate nature, it negotiates with it. And through that negotiation, the people of Dolavira built a city capable of enduring where water itself could not be trusted. Al-Kutum Underground, Tombs Al-Kutum lies near the modern city of Al-Ain, at the edge of the Hajar Mountains where rocky outcrops rise from arid plains. The landscape here is dry, open, and exposed, shaped by stone more than soil. Vegetation is sparse, and the ground reveals its geology openly. In such an environment, architecture does not hide easily. Every structure must justify its presence. Archaeologically, the site is identified as Al-Kutum, a burial complex dating to the Hafid period, around 3200 to 2600 BCE. These tombs belong to one of the earliest known architectural traditions in southeastern Arabia, marking a shift from temporary burial practices to permanent stone construction. The tombs at Al-Kutum are often described as underground or semi-subterranean, though their form is more accurately defined by containment than depth. Stone-built chambers are set low into the ground, sometimes partially sunken, sometimes rising only slightly above the surrounding surface. This low profile is intentional. Rather than asserting visibility across the landscape, the tombs integrate into it. They remain present without dominating their surroundings. The structures are circular in plan, built from carefully stacked local stones arranged in corbelled courses. As the walls rise inward, they form a beehive-like chamber, narrowing toward the top. This corbelling technique allows the chamber to be enclosed without long roofing slabs. Each stone supports the next through balance rather than binding material. The entrances are small and narrow, often low enough to require crouching. Access is restricted, reinforcing separation between the interior burial space and the exterior world. Inside, the chambers are compact and controlled. Space is limited. The tombs were not designed for gathering or repeated visitation. Human remains found in similar Hafit tombs suggest collective burial, with bones placed deliberately rather than randomly accumulated. The tombs were likely reopened multiple times, though access remained carefully controlled. The absence of decoration is notable. Walls are plain. Stones are not carved or engraved. Meaning is conveyed through form rather than imagery. This restraint reflects a cultural focus on permanence rather than display. The stones used in construction were sourced nearby, selected for size and shape rather than refinement. Their natural forms remain visible, giving the chambers a rough, tactile quality. Transporting these stones required coordination, but not large-scale infrastructure. The effort lies in placement and stability rather than distance. Once sealed, the tombs blended into the landscape. Their low height and stone composition made them resistant to erosion and reuse. They were not meant to be reopened frequently. They were meant to remain. The positioning of the tombs suggests awareness of terrain rather than alignment with celestial events. Placement appears practical, using stable ground and avoiding flood-prone areas. This practicality distinguishes Al-Qudam from later monumental burial traditions that emphasize alignment or spectacle. The tombs mark presence rather than authority. They record a decision to commit memory to stone in a region where wood and earth would not endure. The Hafit period represents a transitional moment in Arabian prehistory, when communities began investing in durable architecture despite limited resources. The tombs reflect collective effort rather than centralized power. No single tomb stands apart in scale or complexity. Uniformity dominates. This uniformity suggests shared belief rather than social hierarchy. Over time, burial practices evolved, and new tomb types emerged in the region. Al-Qudam was eventually left behind as traditions changed. Yet the tombs remained. Stone structures built low and tight resist dismantling. They offer little incentive for reuse. As centuries passed, sand and debris accumulated, softening outlines without erasing form. Modern excavation revealed chambers still structurally intact, preserving their original geometry. The tombs do not communicate through inscription or ornament. They communicate through survival. Their endurance demonstrates how early societies adapted architectural techniques to harsh environments. Stone here does not proclaim identity. It safeguards memory. The tombs do not invite prolonged presence. They close inward. They define a boundary between life and death without dramatization. This quiet separation reflects a worldview grounded in continuity rather than display. The chambers do not explain belief systems directly, but they reveal priorities, permanence, restraint, and collective practice. Al-Qudam shows how burial architecture can be both minimal and enduring. It does not rely on depth or height. It relies on balance. As the seventh chapter of this journey, Al-Qudam returns attention to the earliest stages of stone architecture in arid regions. It reveals how communities with limited resources still chose to invest in permanence. Stone here does not rise above the land. It settles into it. And through that integration, the underground tombs of Al-Qudam continue to mark a moment when memory was first anchored deliberately into stone, quietly preserved beneath the open sky of southeastern Arabia. Kokino Megalithic Observatory. Kokino is set high on a volcanic ridge in northeastern North Macedonia, where the land opens toward distant horizons and the sky feels close and unobstructed. The terrain here is rough and uneven, formed from dark andesite stone that fractures naturally into sharp edges and flat plains. It is a place shaped as much by geology as by human choice. Archaeologically, the site is identified as Kokino, a Bronze Age ceremonial and observational complex, dated to roughly 1800 BCE. Unlike enclosed monuments or built structures, Kokino relies almost entirely on natural rock formations subtly modified and arranged to serve a specific purpose. At first glance, Kokino does not resemble a traditional observatory. There are no towers, no domes, no constructed platforms. Instead, the site consists of a series of stone markers, notches, and alignments carved or selected from the existing rock. These features work together to frame the movement of the sun and moon across the horizon. Certain stone markers align with sunrise and sunset positions at key moments of the year, including solstices and equinoxes. Others appear to track lunar cycles, marking more complex patterns that unfold over longer periods. These alignments are not dramatic or immediately obvious. They require careful positioning, observation, and repetition over time to understand. The observatory does not impose itself visually. Its significance emerges only through use. The choice of location is central to this function. The ridge provides uninterrupted sightlines across the surrounding landscape, allowing precise observation of celestial movement without obstruction. Height here is not about dominance, it is about clarity. The stones themselves are minimally altered. Some are cut to create narrow viewing slits or fixed points of reference. Others remain in their natural state, chosen for shape and position rather than transformed. This restraint suggests confidence in landscape rather than desire to reshape it. Observation at Kokino would have required patience. Celestial events occur slowly, repeating only after long intervals. The builders had to return repeatedly, year after year, to confirm patterns. This long-term engagement implies generational knowledge passed through practice rather than written record. The site does not guide movement inward or upward. Instead, it encourages stillness. Observation requires remaining in place, waiting, watching. This contrasts with monuments designed for procession or enclosure. Kokino is outward-facing. The absence of domestic structures indicates that the site was not a settlement. It was visited for specific purposes, likely tied to ritual, timekeeping, and seasonal regulation. Tracking celestial cycles would have been essential for agricultural planning, ritual calendars, and social coordination. Stone here functions as reference rather than shelter. The observatory does not explain the sky, it frames it. Its markers create fixed points against which change becomes visible. Without such fixed references, movement in the sky is difficult to measure precisely. The builders of Kokino understood this principle intuitively. They anchored time to stone. The site's simplicity can be misleading. Alignments require exact placement. Even small errors would have rendered markers ineffective. This precision suggests careful observation and shared agreement on what mattered. The lack of decoration reinforces focus. Nothing distracts from horizon and sky. Stone surfaces are rough, dark, and unadorned. Meaning is produced through alignment, not imagery. Over time, use of the site likely declined as cultural practices changed. The stones remained, still aligned, still framing the same sky. Because the site was not heavily built, it was not dismantled or reused. What cannot be repurposed often survives. The observatory remains exposed to weather, light, and seasonal change, continuing to function as it was designed to. Kokino challenges modern assumptions about early astronomy. It shows that observation does not require instruments in the modern sense. It requires position, patience, and permanence. Stone here acts as memory, holding reference points stable across generations. The site also demonstrates that early societies invested in knowledge that produced no immediate material return. Tracking time was not visible wealth, it was coordination. The observatory reflects a society that understood the value of predictability in an unpredictable world. Seasons govern planting, movement, and ritual. Stone fixed those seasons into place. Kokino does not assert power through size or mass. It asserts understanding. The ridge remains quiet, open, and largely unchanged. The stones do not draw attention to themselves. They direct it outward. As the 8th chapter of this journey, Kokino expands the definition of stone architecture beyond enclosure, burial, and defense. It reveals architecture as observation. It shows how stone could be used to make time visible. The site does not offer spectacle, it offers reference. And through its simple markers and careful placement, Kokino continues to demonstrate how early societies learned to read the sky by anchoring it to the earth, quietly aligning stone, land, and time into a single, enduring system. Sambor Precook Brick Temples. Sambor Precook lies within dense forest in central Cambodia, where vegetation grows quickly and stone structures disappear easily when left unattended. The land here is flat and humid, shaped by seasonal rain rather than elevation. In this environment, architecture does not remain visible by default. It must either be maintained continuously or be gradually reclaimed. Archaeologically, the site is identified as Sambor Pre Kuk, a vast complex of early temple structures dating primarily to the 6th and 7th centuries CE. During the period of the Chenla Kingdom, it represents one of the earliest large-scale expressions of temple-centered urban planning in Southeast Asia. Unlike later Angkorian temples built from sandstone, Sambor Pre Kuk relies heavily on brick. Hundreds of brick temples are distributed across the forest, arranged in clusters rather than aligned along a single axis. This distribution creates a landscape of sacred points rather than a centralized monumental core. The temples are relatively small in scale, yet numerous. Their impact comes from repetition rather than size. Most structures follow a square plan with a single central chamber, accessed through a doorway framed by stone elements. The interiors are narrow and enclosed, intended to house ritual focus rather than gatherings. Brick walls rise thick and vertical, creating compact volumes that emphasize containment. Light enters only through the doorway, reinforcing inward focus. What distinguishes Sambor Pre Kuk is not only material choice, but technique. Many bricks are carved directly after placement, with intricate vegetal and geometric patterns cut into the surface. These carvings were executed without mortar joints interrupting design. This suggests extraordinary precision in brick manufacture and placement. Each brick had to align perfectly with its neighbors before carving began. The absence of visible mortar in many structures remains a subject of study. Bricks were fitted so tightly that binding material is difficult to detect, indicating advanced understanding of weight distribution and surface preparation. The decorative programs are subtle rather than overwhelming. Patterns repeat gently across surfaces, creating rhythm without visual dominance. The temples were not isolated shrines. They were part of a wider ritual landscape that included water features, causeways, and boundary markers. Orientation varies between structures, suggesting that alignment was determined by localized ritual considerations rather than a single overarching plan. This flexibility contrasts with later temple complexes that enforce strict axial symmetry. At Sambor Pre Kuk, sacred space is dispersed. The forest setting reinforces this dispersion. Paths between temples are indirect, shaped by terrain and vegetation rather than straight lines. Movement through the site is gradual and exploratory rather than processional. The choice of brick reflects environmental adaptation. Brick is lighter than stone, easier to produce locally, and suitable for humid conditions when properly maintained. However, brick also erodes faster when neglected. The survival of these temples indicates long periods of care and repair during their active use. The builders invested not only in construction, but in continuity. Sambor Pre Kuk's temples were dedicated primarily to Hindu deities, particularly Shiva, reflecting early Indian religious influence adapted to local context. Yet the architecture does not replicate Indian temples directly. Forms are modified, scaled, and arranged according to regional tradition. This adaptation marks an early stage of Khmer architectural identity rather than imitation. The temple clusters functioned as both religious and administrative centers. Ritual, governance, and settlement coexisted rather than occupying separate zones. This integration laid the groundwork for later Angkorian city temple systems. Over time, political centers shifted. New capitals rose elsewhere. Sambor Pre Kuk lost its central role. Without continuous maintenance, vegetation slowly overtook the brickwork. Roots penetrated walls. Moisture softened surfaces. Yet many structures remained standing. Brick here did not fail suddenly. It weathered gradually. The forest protected as much as it destroyed. Dense canopy reduced temperature extremes and slowed erosion. What survives today is a dialogue between architecture and environment rather than a frozen ruin. The temples appear and disappear among trees, reinforcing their original distributed character. They don't demand attention from afar. They reward proximity. The site reveals how early Southeast Asian societies explored monumentality through repetition, material control, and ritual density rather than sheer scale. Sambor Pre Kuk demonstrates that architectural complexity does not require massive stone blocks or centralized symmetry. It requires consistency, knowledge, and shared intention. The brick temples do not narrate history through inscription or relief scenes. They express it through form and persistence. Each structure marks a point of devotion, rather than a statement of power. As the ninth chapter of this journey, Sambor Pre Kuk expands the understanding of ancient architecture beyond stone and monumentality. It shows how brick, often seen as impermanent, could support sacred landscapes lasting over a millennium. The temples remain scattered, quiet, and partially concealed, still shaped by the forest that surrounds them. They do not assert dominance over the land. They coexist with it, and through their dispersed presence and careful construction, Sambor Pre Kuk continues to reveal how early societies built sacred space not by concentrating power, but by distributing it across landscape, material, and time. Ta Sango Mnara Coral Stone Foundations. Sango Mnara lies on a small island off the southern coast of present-day Tanzania, where the Indian Ocean meets low coral shores and mangrove-lined inlets. The landscape here is shaped by tides rather than elevation. Land appears and disappears subtly, defined by water movement more than solid boundaries. In such a setting, architecture must negotiate instability from the beginning. Archaeologically, this site is identified as Sango Mnara, a Swahili coastal settlement occupied primarily between the 14th and early 16th centuries CE. It belongs to a network of stone-built towns that flourished along the East African coast, sustained by maritime trade linking Africa, Arabia, India, and the wider Indian Ocean world. Unlike inland stone traditions, Sango Mnara was built almost entirely from coral limestone. This material was quarried locally from fossilized reef, cut while still relatively soft, and hardened over time once exposed. The choice of coral stone reflects both environmental adaptation and maritime knowledge. The foundations of Sango Mnara define the city's form, even where walls have collapsed. Rectangular house plans, courtyards, mosques, and tombs remain legible at ground level, tracing an urban layout shaped more by social order than defensive concern. The city was not enclosed by massive walls. Instead, boundaries were subtle, marked by spatial organization rather than fortification. This openness reflects a society oriented toward trade rather than conflict. Residential buildings were constructed around internal courtyards, creating inward-facing domestic space that balanced privacy with ventilation. Coral stone walls were thick enough to moderate temperature, protecting interiors from coastal heat. The foundations reveal careful planning. Houses align along narrow lanes that guide movement without enforcing rigid hierarchy. Space is shared, negotiated, and layered rather than dominated. Several mosques stand at key points within the settlement, their coral foundations indicating communal focal points rather than monumental centers. These structures emphasize orientation and gathering rather than vertical display. Stone tombs, often placed near houses or mosques, integrate burial into daily space. Death was not isolated beyond the city. It remained present within it. The coral stone foundations required constant maintenance. Exposure to salt air and humidity demanded care, suggesting that Sango Mnara was actively inhabited rather than symbolic. The builders understood how coral stone behaves. Walls were often plastered with lime to protect surfaces and regulate moisture. Architecture here was as much about surface treatment as structure. Trade wealth flowed through the city. Imported ceramics, glass beads, and coins found during excavation indicate long-distance connections. Yet this wealth is not expressed through monumental scale. Instead, it appears in refinement of space. The city's layout reflects social differentiation without extreme disparity. Some houses are larger and more complex, but none dominate the settlement. This balance suggests a mercantile society where status was expressed through household organization rather than centralized authority. The foundations show evidence of drainage channels and raised thresholds, adaptations to seasonal flooding and tidal influence. Water management was embedded into architecture rather than treated as separate infrastructure. Sango Mnara's position allowed direct access to sea routes while remaining sheltered from open ocean conditions. This balance made it an ideal trading hub. The city did not expand indefinitely. Its size remained relatively compact, reinforcing density rather than sprawl. When trade networks shifted and political conditions changed, occupation declined. The city was not violently destroyed. It was gradually left behind. Without continuous maintenance, coral stone structures deteriorated, roofs collapsed, walls eroded, foundations remained. What survives today is the city's footprint rather than its skyline. This footprint is enough. The foundations preserve the logic of the settlement, how space was divided, shared, and connected. They show how Swahili urbanism emphasized integration rather than separation. Architecture here does not isolate sacred from domestic or elite from communal through massive barriers. Boundaries are subtle and negotiated. The absence of fortification suggests confidence in networks rather than fear of attack. Stone here supports movement and exchange rather than defense. Sango Manara challenges assumptions that durability requires hardness. Coral stone, though fragile compared to granite or basalt, endured through design and maintenance. Its survival depended on community engagement rather than material dominance. The foundations reveal a city built for living rather than display. There are no towering monuments, no axial avenues, no grand platforms. Instead, there is continuity of space. The city reads as a system of relationships rather than a hierarchy. This relational architecture reflects Swahili identity, shaped by exchange, language, and movement across water. Stone here anchors a culture defined by flow. As the 10th chapter of this journey, Sango Manara expands the understanding of prehistoric and early historic architecture into maritime contexts. It shows how cities could be built not to resist the sea, but to live with it. The coral foundations remain low, quiet, and exposed, tracing outlines of homes, mosques, and paths beneath open sky. They do not rise, they remember. And through these stone traces, Sango Manara continues to reveal how architecture can embody trade, belief, and daily life without monumentality, relying instead on balance, adaptation, and shared space along the shifting edge of the Indian Ocean.